it marks the 1 week anniversary, a week to the day that the college football world was thrown on its axis when Nick Saban abruptly retired at Alabama. Since then, Kalen DeBoer has been named the head coach. He's putting a staff together as we speak. There's players portaling in and portaling out. But Paul, you've had a week to digest. First of all, thanks for joining us. You've had a week to digest the Nick Saban retirement. Where are you with it?
It's still a lot to process, Matt. And I think what's even more interesting is what I do in the afternoon, talking to callers. They're still having a hard time with it. But it's now on, and now it's really trying to preserve what he has built. And with each hour, he adds coaching assistants, some very good, but continues to lose key players. As we're coming on the air here, Caleb Downs.
Yep.
Probably the most valuable player on his team, is moving toward the portal, perhaps to Georgia. That seems to be the likely landing spot, and that's a big blow. I don't want to make it into one player, but sometimes these things circle around one individual, and right now that's the biggest story.
Yeah, Isaiah Bond was another huge loss for the Alabama Crimson Tide. He ended up at Texas with Sark, who continues to build through the portal. You mentioned Caleb Downs. This is going to be probably one of the larger NIL deals that's not a quarterback we'll see out there. And so it'll be interesting to see, but the aftershocks of the Saban retirement continue, and more has come out. You know, Reese Davis had the interview with him in the sit down, and he had talked about he didn't know 5 minutes before that he was going to do this. Ultimately, Paul, I think we're now at an inflection point in college football now that we've had a couple of cycles of NIL and portal, in that it's a young man's game. Coaching is now a younger man's game. And this isn't to say Saban couldn't do it at 72 years old. He's proven that he can do it. But I think at the end of the day, what we're starting to see now is if you don't have the energy to do this continuously 24/7, 365, Paul, we might see other legends step away, because we've seen it in college hoops, and now we're starting to see it in college football.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we've seen it more in basketball because there really aren't too many people in Saban's league age-wise. There are a couple, but not many. And I think you're right. And you're plugged in about as close as anybody, Matt. So you heard the rumors all year. He's tired. I mean, you've never heard Nick Saban admit to anyone he was tired. And this year he seemed to tell everyone who was listening he was. So I don't think that's a big surprise that he walked away. And I think he also knew he left this place in great shape. I mean, yeah, he was winning championships about every 2.3 years. And he hasn't won one in 3 complete seasons. But his last 4 years at Alabama, he finished 1st, 2nd, 5th, and 5th. That's hardly a guy who fell apart. But by his standards, it wasn't good enough. And I think he decided it was time to go on. And, you know, everybody thinks they know where he's going next, as we probably do. That's not really the issue. I mean, unfortunately, when you exit, you're no longer the story. Kalen DeBoer is the story at Alabama.
Yeah, and now as we advance the story, and like I said, it's been a week ago today. We're taping this Wednesday at around 10:45 a.m. Eastern, that we were sitting there going, "Oh my goodness, Nick Saban's gone." We talk about it all the time, like, Brian Kelly being in a good spot, Lane Kiffin being in a good spot, Kirby Smart being in a good spot to kind of sit there. Sark now of, are they going to be in the league when Saban walks away? And the answer to that now is yes. And so you have to project forward of who's going to be that dominant program, because Paul, I say this cautiously, and I hope the listeners understand what it is I'm really trying to say. The Alabama job pre-Nick Saban was one of need, meaning pre-Nick Saban, post-Gene Stallings, wasn't great. They suffered quite a bit. Nick Saban turned that into the most dominant program in college football. But the job became great because of what Nick Saban made it. Now Kalen DeBoer comes in, follows an all-time great, but where is the Alabama job now with knowing what Nick Saban was able to make it be?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly. I mean, if we're watching this in the parlance of Wall Street, and Jim Cramer sitting here instead of me, he's worried because I'm already hearing Alabama people say, "Yeah, there'll be a course correction." You didn't hear that for the last 17 years. Of course, correction was losing the national championship game to Clemson or Georgia. It's not trying to figure out where you are. And I think DeBoer was probably as good as you could. I mean, if you and I were naming 5 names, he would now be on it. He wouldn't have been on it before last Monday night.
Right.
But he's Dan Lanning, Sark, the usual suspects. But when you introduce a coach and under on the Chiron, that's what you put under the person's name if you're watching Sports Center with Matt Barrie, National Coach of the Year. I mean, that's a pretty impressive thing to put on your resume as you're being introduced at Alabama.
Yeah, and he did it for 2 years. I mean, his rise has been meteoric. At Fresno State, kind of turned them around. He's an OC at Indiana, got a head coaching job, an opportunity at Fresno State. He was there for a couple of years, goes up to Washington. Here's where he takes Washington 11-2 and then undefeated into the national championship game. He did a lot through the portal. He didn't build stability at Washington in that he didn't go all in on high school recruiting, which a lot of coaches don't, but he did it through the portal. And now that he's gone and most of the offense is gone, we're going to see with Jed Fish, who left Arizona to take that job, what that program is going to be at Washington, because I don't think there was much left over. So now you take a coach that's got a small resume, albeit an impressive one, that goes to a program that Paul, through pretty much 95% of Saban's 17 years there, was done through the best recruiting in the country and the best talent development in the country. And I don't know that Alabama fans are going to sit back and want this to be a microwave thing where you bring in a couple of portal guys, heat them up, try to compete, and move on to the next season.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing you're already noticing is, are there sharks in the water? Yeah. I mean, these aren't just great white. These are great white serial killer sharks. And they go by the name of Kirby Smart, Lane Kiffin, Brian Kelly, a shark. I mean, I would throw Hugh Freeze in there, but that's for another day. I mean, his program is under enough problems from within, let alone from worrying about catching Nick Saban X program. So yeah, I mean that's really the problem, and that's the one thing that you don't get a chance. Well, as you're flying across the country Friday, which is about 5.5 hours from Seattle to Tuscaloosa, your program is under assault, and there's nothing you can do about it from 38,000 feet, and that's really how he landed, and I think he'll figure it out. But before he figures it out, he's already lost his probably most valuable coach, Tavarius Robinson. Great recruiter, great coach. He's already gone to Georgia. He's lost 5 or 6 players in the portal, and the one we mentioned earlier, Caleb Downs. People will say, well, he's a freshman. Yeah, he's a freshman that very well may have been the most valuable player on that team last year, other than maybe Jalen Milroe down the stretch. I mean, you're trying to figure out how to get to work in the morning while you're trying to preserve your staff. And he's already brought in 2 people, the Buffalo head coach and Kane Womack from South Alabama. He knows both of them. He's worked with both of them. So he's going to have a lot of people around him that understand him, but they may not understand the SEC.
Well, and I'm glad you pointed that out, because that's inflection point number 2 for me, is that group of 5 head coaching jobs used to be, I mean, one Sun Belt, South Alabama, and one is Mac in Buffalo. These used to be, Paul, legitimate stepping stone opportunities for these head coaches to then maybe get into, a job, let's call it in the Mountain West. Maybe that's a stepping stone, or maybe a bottom tier Power 5 job to start building their career. Paul, they understand now, group of 5 head coaching jobs, your rosters are getting pillaged by Power 5. I can't remember the last time 2 sitting head coaches left for assistant coaching jobs. To me, that's a sign of what's coming.
You're right. And by the way, those are, we're talking about high-paying jobs at Alabama, where you are on the center stage, and if you're successful, you'll land that big job that you probably would have landed anyway, but you're making a lot more money and getting a lot better experience being the coordinator at Alabama than the head coach at Buffalo or South Alabama. So yeah, and again, I mean I mean, we're talking here on Wednesday. He landed on Friday afternoon. That is not a lot of time, but in the world that we live in, it's a lifetime.
Give me something